But,
I was just on your BITC thread.
we'll just start right away, yeah?
Yeah, sorry, cool.
Okay, cool.
What are you saying? We're talking about, I think at the moment we're talking about the debate that Uthman is having with James Fodor, I think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that guy...
He's from Melbourne, right?
Yeah, I never met him though, but he did some studies at Melbourne Uni, and he was... Before the Atheist Society collapsed there, I think he was pretty active.
Why did it collapse? Someone make Dawah against him?
No, you know what?
Happened?
Like, it's a little bit ironic that they have nothing to come together anyway. So in the sense that, like, the Atheist Society is in all the universities, in fact, I think, except for one, have all been deregistered for some reason or another. And they lack a lot of... they lack a lot of attendees, a lot of
the FITRA is getting to them.
I think there's something behind that, yeah. And they've all collapsed for that reason. But anyway, this guy was there at Melbourne Uni, and Melbourne Uni was probably active. And I think I wrote it on the thread there that he's got like a cosmic skeptic sort of style. You know that guy?
Yeah.
What's his name?
Cosmic skeptic. That's
Alex O'Connor. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in the sense that, like, he sounds really smart, yeah?
Yeah.
Like, he puts words together quite well and makes...
Decent speaker as well.
Makes a simple concept sound really complicated. And I think, anyway, I bought his book. So I linked a book the way he takes a shot at William Lane Craig and the Kalam cosmological argument. I agree to, like, half of the book I agree with him on, is that WLC takes the KCA to prove Christianity, which it doesn't.
By the way, can you explain the acronyms for listeners that are confused?
WLC is William Lane Craig. So he's known for popularizing the Kalam cosmological argument, the argument for the existence of God that was essentially penned by or brought up by Muslim theologians, yeah, in the Kalam tradition. So we're talking about Al-Kindi, Al-Ghazali, those sort of thinkers, yeah. And he's in modern times, he's really brought it out. And it's sort of ironic that Muslims didn't popularize it, but I guess he popularized it in the West, so fair enough.
And why privilege, you know? White guy talks about it like, wow, and take it seriously. If it's a brown guy, you know, it wouldn't be taken as serious,
actually,
unfortunately.
You're right. If you've got an American accent or a British accent, everything sounds so much more legit, yeah? But he did his whole PhD on it, and he did all this work on it. And ironically enough, he's used this argument to prove the existence of God. But and by virtue of that, he's delved into proving Christianity by simply proving the existence of God. I think there's this overwhelming thinking in some parts of the West. I think it's maybe from a sort of a European legacy where God equals Christianity. And so without Christianity, you just simply become atheist. And that sort of happened a lot in post-Enlightenment, when people, all they knew was in terms of religion, in terms of a God, all they knew was Christianity, Jesus, Christianity. And as soon as they left Jesus, Christianity, they either became deist or they became atheist. And they never knew anything else.
Deist in the sense, like, just to give you an example, what I've experienced, it's like, yeah, I believe in God, but I don't think God would send down these rules and regulations for us to sort of follow, and you know, sometimes it's a bit strict and dogmatic. So I think God
is basically like
bound to that.
You God is a Western liberal.
It's pretty much. Yeah. But that I don't think that would fall under a deistic sort of category, would it?
So deism would essentially, I mean, the one that I'm familiar with. Sometimes there's many shades of many things. 50 Shades of Deism. Yeah. Can I say that on this podcast? Yeah. Make sure you edit that a bit out. So it's essentially that God is just the first cause. He's a Kickstarter. Yeah. So yeah, I get it. You know, there's the universe came into existence by a particular cause that had particular nature, and you know what? That's all he did. That all he did was get the process started, and he has no interest in anything else. Yeah, and so he's not a personal God. Yeah, he doesn't care about anything else. He doesn't. And so I think the disconnect here is the rejection of revelation, the rejection of guidance and instruction. Yeah, and so a deist wouldn't necessarily have a problem with believing that an all-powerful supreme being exists that started this, but that this all-powerful supreme being has not given any instruction or guidance in terms of how to live our life, in terms of our purpose of life, and or whatnot. So sort of accepting the existence of God, but living like an atheist sort of thing, if you want to call it like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was thinking though about the debates in early Islamic history, and I think that whilst not to that extent where there was no wahi whatsoever, like God completely left with his hands tied behind his back, were there not Muslim thinkers who sort of trended in that direction? There was sort of trend in that direction of, you know, God perhaps not having knowledge of particulars amongst certain of the philosophical.
Yeah, this is where it gets a bit spicy, huh? I think it's Ibn Sina who's known to take that, and he's been heavily criticized and takfired by the likes of Ghazali and Ibn Taymiyyah as well. And I'd like to think that Ibn Sina was misunderstood, because I still don't get my head around his argument. And essentially, his argument for the existence of God sort of ends up concluding that the universe is eternal, and it's a little bit convoluted, and so I haven't been able to grasp it myself, and so for that reason, I'll be like, you know what, maybe he's been a bit misunderstood.
Yeah, I think sometimes for us in our when we look to our own scholars in our own tradition, we sometimes use as a default sort of like, even with Ibn Arabi, like, you know, a bit of controversy around his, you know, ideas and thinking, but everyone's just like, yeah, you know, I just hope, you know, he had he knew what he was talking about. We just don't get it, you know. We're just little, like, you know, down the ladder in terms of understanding, and these guys are like up there, and we just didn't understand what they're understanding, so that's why, you know, they just had those ideas, sort of thing.
But you'd hope that, you know, actually I think you'd have a lot of confidence, but that, you know, the classical scholars who responded to them understood what they were saying. But anyway, the takfir is not bounding upon the ummah. So if one scholar puts, excommunicates someone for a particular reason, doesn't mean that it's binding on everyone to then taqleed that, you know, just blind follow that. So for that reason, we don't take Ibn Sina out of our Islamic tradition. Yeah. But there are that sort of that level of thinking in some places. But yeah, back to the deism thing. Yeah. So the deistic concept, a lot of people still actually do believe in deism. And I think there was an article in, where was it? I think Al Jazeera was talking about this a few years ago, about this is becoming quite prominent in Turkey, of all places, that people are being brought up in a sort of atheistic tradition, but they don't want to live the life that comes with it. Yeah. So when you ask them, they haven't left Islam, they haven't left the belief in the existence of God, but they've left the lifestyle. Yeah.
They'll say something like, if you query them about an obvious contradiction in the way they live their lives and the, you know, Islamic lifestyle, they'll say God has higher concerns or something.
Yeah,
like
that's an interesting rebuttal that it brings up, and I think and I'm not sure if you had Bassam Zawadi on this yet, but if you haven't, get him on there. He's written a paper on deism, and I think it's a refutation of deism, and it's on academy.edu, I think it is, and it's a quite extensive paper on the history of deism and responding to certain contentions. And I only skimmed through it when I went past it. So, but that's a really good resource in terms of knowing what that is and how it manifests, because I think you can sort of subconsciously adopt it without knowing it. But anyway, I think the real disconnect here is that the concept of revelation, that we in our Islamic tradition, we believe that God exists, but he's also revealed himself. Yeah, he wants his creation to be guided. So he's given creation guidance. Yeah. And anyway, there's a little bit more complexity in our tradition, in the sense that, you know, scholars have discussed whether, you know, even in the absence of guidance, yeah, do we have a, you know, innate moral compass as well? Would we still act in a moral fashion if we didn't have access to guidance? And anyway, these are sort of like, you know,
even with I think with philosophical schools like the Asharis and Maturidis have differing opinions about if, for example, someone did not receive sort of or get access to like scripture or revelation, are they still accountable for, I don't know, their sins, or even accountable for not being guided? Because at the end there's the fitra as well, so it kind of, asks the question like, should you already be worshipping God because, you know, you have that innate disposition, or do you have to look to revelation? So I think these discussions were...
And it's also even, you know, the concept of objective morality, yeah? If objective morality even exists. I know we always, as Muslims, when it comes to debating atheism, we use this argument, yeah. But then in the schools of in the schools of Aqidah, it gets a little bit spicy.
Yeah, it does.
Topic, yeah. So it's like, you know, which one is it?
Yeah.
I think it's in the Ash'ari school, especially. And so you know, but nevertheless, I mean, I think all these little details, particulars, a lot of people get lost in them, and I'm not sure how relevant it is, you know, I'm more in the Dawah sphere in terms of engaging with non-Muslims and you know, articulate the message of Islam in the best way possible. And so I try and stay away from these. This is somewhat of intra-Muslim discussions that I had. And even the concept of evolution, there's other particulars that I think are worth having an internal Muslim discussion about. But are probably not so useful for, you know, sharing the message of Islam, in the sense that, like, they're just, you know, they're a little bit underneath that.
I tend to treat them more as like a curiosity or something to keep me busy on the side. You know, you have a look and you explore the different opinions of classical scholars regarding these things. Although that being said, I think it's important that the people engaged in Dawah have an awareness of them, because it's really interesting, and I'm sure you've had this experience where like a non-Muslim will come and bring up something rather obscure from our tradition to do with like a philosophical point, and be like, oh yeah, but didn't Al-Ghazali say this?
I remember,
or like, didn't
Subha Ahmed mentioned, like, you know, Tafsir Jalalain.
That was Jonathan
Brown
Brown
comes up,
and he's like Muslims haven't read Tafsir Jalalain, you know.
Yeah, actually, there was a so there's this guy. I mean, I shouldn't respond to this guy. If he's listening, it's probably disrespectful to him. He's someone who I actually deeply respect, and have learned a lot from, whether he realizes it or not.
Mashallah, Rafael.
Okay, I should just say his name, shouldn't I? Yeah. So you guys should get him on the podcast. I give you some good context, by the way. Dr. Shoaib Ahmed Malik.
Oh yeah. I'm in contact with him.
Yeah,
so inshallah, get him on.
We were trying to get him we're trying to get him over to do a tour of Australia a couple years ago. But anyway, there was some impediments that occurred, and we weren't able to get him in. But nevertheless, so he has a particular take on him, and Solomon Jalil have sort of probably brought a few details into the concept of evolution and how Muslims can navigate this concept a little bit more. And now, so this is one of those things that if non-Muslims read into this, it's not, for example, just dismissing evolution altogether. Well, wait a second, there's a bit more. And that's actually commonly done by many Muslim apologists. They'll dismiss Darwinian evolution altogether. But then and I may have been one of those people, I think, until I encountered some of their works. And
Mashallah, I love your honesty. That's amazing.
Oh, this is a confession, huh? No, I'm pretty sure many people have. Maybe they just haven't. You know, we just haven't.
Didn't we all have a phase like, you know, stuck for a philosophy, just follow Quran and Sunnah or something, like, you know, we all had that phase, and so like we get a bit more nuanced and we talk about you know, evolution and stuff, and like, yeah, stuck for, like, you know, Adam and Eve were first, I don't know, humans. Why are we believing in evolution or whatever, like that kind of discourse.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I went through that myself, but I mean, everyone goes through different phases, and that's just part of like getting to know yourself and what you believe in. But yeah, so with the evolution one, so he's brought in a few more details, and it's made the topic a little bit, I think, a little bit more exciting actually. And I'm currently doing a course which I'm so behind in, which I need to catch up on a lot of.
Sapiens?
No, I'm doing a course with Al-Balagh.
Oh, I know them. Yeah. Why are we plugging all these people, man? They should pay us $100 for their. Anyways,
it's my fault. It's my fault. It's a conflict of interest. I'm probably getting paid behind, and you don't even know it. Yeah. So, you know, I'm doing that course, but I'm familiar with a bit of his work before, because I've read his papers and I've listened to his live streams and whatnot. And if you read the Yaqeen paper on evolution, the one that DH you know, dissected really badly and misrepresented. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah, you're allowed. You can say his name though, so not. It's up to interpretation, DH, what does that even mean?
Let's just call him DH. Yeah, he did a really bad job of that, actually. But yeah, so then I had a chat with Sabur about this, because Sabur is known for,
the evolution guy.
Yeah, he's the evolution guy. Yeah? We're going to talk about evolution, Islam, talk to Sabur Ahmed. And I still believe that, mashallah. He's quite rich in knowledge in there. And I said to him, well, what about this? Well, they have this concept, Solomon Jalil brings this concept of tawakkuf, I think it's called. It's sort of like Islam is sort of silent on this issue, per se, in the sense, and they bring in a model of evolution that is a theistic guided model, but that that makes sense of the other evidences. So what I mean by that is that we have all these fossil records and remains of other Homo X, Y, and Zs, and I can't remember the names.
Homo X, Y, Zs.
Yeah, as in like
sounds like we're going to get cancelled.
I'll throw some names in there. Homo habilis, Homo erectus, all those ones, right? Yeah. I'm not. This is not my field, so I'm not. For that reason, I'm not going to pretend that I know what I'm talking about. So
don't worry, you're doing better than a lot of mashayikh who pretend to know about it and go on. But anyways,
so in the sense that there was forms of human kinds of what we call it that already existed, but it was the creation of the Homo sapien, us as human beings that we are now. That was the moment of creation and on mankind coming to Earth. In a sense, before there was things already there, like dinosaurs and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, he makes a theory of it, and I think the theory of it really broadens the intellectual perspective on the topic. But for the sake of Dawah, for the sake of discussion and bringing people to the realization of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his religion, I don't see how. I think it's a little bit complicated and a little bit probably misses the point a bit. But so anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that there's certain things that the conversation should sort of remain and be dissected within Muslims, and then there's certain things that I think are better shared with others. But yeah, when non-Muslims have come into and read stuff, it does make it, oh man, now I have to go through this maze as well. Hey.
It's an interesting point you make about the Dawah, though, because when I came into studying Islam, I was about 17 years old. I was like a militant sort of new atheist. And I suppose what actually impressed me was the fact that the Muslim community were having sophisticated conversations about these things. I'm like, that's actually a sign of a kind of intellectual flourishing that's not really talked about. I know that wouldn't necessarily be the case for everyone. In fact, a lot of people might be, and I've experienced firsthand some Muslims being very sort of disoriented by like these debates going on. They'd be like, I thought it was cut and dry, but not for everyone. I think especially in a academic setting, like in where we are active in universities, perhaps it's not necessarily so dire to be transparent about these discussions, because I think, as I said, for me, I found it quite interesting, and it showed me that the Muslim community, had ongoing discussion, discourse, and intellectual contribution, and it was very much alive.
Wouldn't you also say like you'd sense a person wants that sort of sophistication at times, because as a non-Muslim who might be remotely interested in Islam, where they're not like some guy around who says, "Oh, astaghfirullah, evolution haram" or something, and he'll be like, "What the hell?"
I think it depends.
Like, so
on that point, Rafael, is that if you actually look at a lot of the work that's being done, probably in the last 50, 60, 70 years, it's been done by non-Muslims. And so all these areas of Islamic philosophy or kalam and whatnot, a lot of non-Muslim Islamic studies faculties are doing a lot of this work. So beautiful. Like, the introduction of, you have John Hoover, who has done a lot of work on the life of Ibn Taymiyyah, his thinking. He was
on Dr. Shoaib Malik's
podcast.
I listened to that as well.
And then there's others in terms of even, occasionalism for Ghazali and other things, from the Ash'ari school. And there's so much being done purely from an academic lens. Of course, these people don't believe in Islam or anything like that, but they look at it purely as an academic exercise. And there is a lot of work that's already been done. So it's actually not surprising to get non-Muslims who have bothered to pick up a book to know about this stuff, because it's out there in the domain already. So it's not like it's hidden. And if anything, our Muslim tradition, maybe it's where we're at the moment, as second and third generation migrant community in the West. Our focus hasn't matured to directions like that yet. We're still thinking about holding on to our Islamic belief, our identity. There's so many social issues and all this other stuff and other realities on the ground that need addressing. Then there's little thought bubbles that some of us can be in.
No, you're right. We have to take the rock out of the shoe first, and then perhaps we'll be able to have a more sort of, how would you say, like this kind of culture can be enabled to sort of flourish further, because it's difficult at the moment, and like you said, you have people questioning the existence of God. They're not even aware of arguments for God in a philosophical, in a sort of very basic philosophical arguments for God. And I think that they're probably most important for Muslims and non-Muslims. And we talked about this on the podcast with Subur Ahmed as well, how there was kind of this onslaught of new atheism and militant new atheism.
It still is as
and
well.
And it's sort of, but I feel like initially there wasn't a strong Muslim reply to it. Or at least before social media and before YouTube and before these massive Dawah figures were able to come back, like, with iERA. And then it's almost like all of a sudden we started coming up with responses that they couldn't necessarily answer, and they had to go back and think about it, sort of, especially in regards to like morality. And I feel that kind of links to what you said before about the atheist societies on campus constantly just falling apart, because you realize that atheists really don't agree on very much at all. Like, some are utilitarians, some are kind of very nihilistic in the Nietzsche way, sort of. And then you have like communists, and you have the sort of new age secular humanists.
There's lots of shades of atheism.
I should name the podcast.
And when we start asking questions to atheists, they all have different answers. And so that kind of leads to the and basically the pendulum sort of swung back again. And I mean, that's a testament to the work done by these.
But on that, there's another plug, and I'll mention Bassam here again. And this guy's getting so much rep. Yeah. No, but he deserves it. He deserves it. So there's some people who are in the Dawah scene, like OGs, yeah, in the sense that they were in the Dawah scene, pre-90s or 80s, all that sort of stuff. You just got dial-up internet. Did they have dial-up internet in the 90s?
Maybe it was, yeah.
I think it was there.
Is that when you couldn't use your phone and the internet at the same time?
Yeah. Wow.
I was like,
okay, Booba. That's me. I was around back then. Yeah. So I'm not that old, but yeah. The point is that so these people who are the Muslims in this space, yeah. And in the beginning, it was, and Bassam had a post on this on his Facebook page, and I got in touch with him and I said to him, I want to do a live stream on this about the history of Islamic apologetics and Dawah, because he was there, in that time, right? In the early sort
he was
of
debating Christians, like David Root or something.
So this is like in the proto days, the early days of this, and it's so easy to just take it for granted now. And there's still a lot of work to be done. But there's sort of that historical experience that the only people who were there can know in terms of what they strategized, what they what they took as important, what they sought to focus on as opposed to other things. And one thing he mentioned at the time was that they just needed to provide responses to certain things. So it wasn't about detailed, academically sort of like reference sort of thing, blah, blah. They just needed to come out with responses at the time. And that's what they focused on in the beginning. And then, his advice now is a lot of that basic 101 groundwork, those, responding to basic Orientalist claims or Christian missionary claims. A lot of the basic stuff is there done. Yeah. And he's like, now it's really the time to specialize and focus on a particular topic and dissect it to the nth degree and really provide a really meaningful response to a lot of this sort of stuff. But anyway, I was really interested in, because I was particularly interested in finding out that historical experience, that evolution of the Dawah, evolution, huh? Well, let's come back to this. That has occurred, and sort of the ebbs and flows and the changes of directions because of that. And he said to me, I'm really, really busy at the moment. I can't, maybe in April. So in April, I'm going to get in touch with him, and maybe you guys should do it first. I don't know. But it will be a really interesting discussion. I think I'd learn a lot from I like having those old man conversations about, back in our days. This is what we did.
We had dial-up internet.
This is how we responded.
2 megabytes per YouTube video and take like 50 hours.
Yeah, and I think he was the one. I think he was one of the ones who stayed away from the Aqidah wars of the 90s and thousands. The rise of
the hardcore Salafis.
Yeah, I guess he identifies as a Salafi, but he's a very well-rounded one, mashallah. So
he's where that Salafi movement eventually arrived at. Most of them, because they all started off kind of a bit more. There were a lot of gung ho, and then a lot of them sort of settled down and mellowed out when they realized like this is a stalemate, like it's not going to end.
Well, especially pre-war on terror.
Yeah,
it was like. It was
exactly
pre-war on terror. There was abundance of materials and whatnot.
And now you have like the soft Salafis, and so like that's where that was the conclusion they kind of reached. So he was already at that.
I think he was. Anyway, I would like to find out from him from what I know at least. But there's really well-rounded people from all sides of the sphere, whichever side of the table they sit on, and there's a lot to learn from a lot of people, and so he's definitely one of those people. But yeah,
we're talking about different shades of atheism. That could be a podcast or a book, different shades of atheism, and go through each one of them. Anyway, the reason why we brought that up was James Fordell. Yeah, so the Melbourne Uni. Let's go back to the Melbourne Uni debate. Yeah, let's go back to the UNSW debate with Uthman Badr, I think it is, coming up, and his opponent is James Fordell. And so he wrote a book. He wrote a book that responds to William Lane Craig and the Kalam cosmological argument, and he basically says WLC takes the KCA, if you guys follow, a little bit too far. And I agree with him on that. But then he spends his whole, 3/4 of the book, I think it is, or half of the book, a big chunk of it, trying to debunk the KCA, which I think he does very poorly. And the book is really thick. And I was like, man, this guy, the book's really thick. Yeah. For a guy who, I think he's a master's student, he's not a PhD or anything like that. I was like, man, he's put a lot of effort in this. Yeah. He's put a lot of effort in this. Bad. But I think it's very verbose. You dedicate to the atheism.
Yeah, it is.
Give respect for its due,
So when Saadi said, "Is he a worthy opponent?" I thought, he's probably as good as it's going to get.
This one debated Subul, right? When Subul
he did
on evolution. I think
Subul said he was an intellectual type of atheist as well. So Subul gave him a decent rap. He gave him,
a go rap.
He's a funny man.
That takes me back.
Cheap shot. Cheap shot. Yeah, no, I don't think he did the go rap on you. If you know, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, that was that, and we've got a debate lined up at UNSW on Friday, I think it is. Friday, yeah, that's 26. Faraz Nomani.
Can we talk about Faraz back on the scene?
Faraz back on the scene.
That's a big one. I didn't see that coming. I was like, whoa.
He actually sent me a voice recording. What is it? Weeks ago, I think, when he got the first invite, and he's like, "I'm thinking of coming back," and they're really trying to pull me in, and because he's taking a step back deliberately, and obviously being sort of one of the godfathers of UNSW MSA. There's always going to be somebody trying to reel him back in. And I think, and I said to him, do it, man. Do it. So I'm sure there's a bit more to that story, but I'm planning on meeting up with him in the next couple of days. Actually, probably tomorrow or the day after, I'll meet up with him and Uthman, inshallah, and we'll find out what's up.
Just to give context for listeners overseas, Faraz Nomani, he was doing debates against some big name people back in the day, right? He had contacts with Hamza Tsortis back in the day as well, so he was in that same debating scene.
He did it. Oh man, that was the iconic debate, that one. Only because I think it was 2012 or 13, Swinburne University, and the lecture theatre was packed. I think it wasn't a big lecture theatre; it was maybe 200 people, but it was packed to the brim. There was no seats left. You could actually feel people's body heat in that lecture theatre, and it was Faraz and Hamza versus Perkins and some other guy. Perkins, right hand.
We don't remember the atheists.
Yeah, right hand.
Whoever's repping the Islam Ummah.
He's probably the one listening to this podcast that would be like,
I don't remember his name, but I remember I remember one of the couple of things that they said. And so for some reason, I've been to Islam atheism debates before, But this one had an atmosphere to it. Like you could feel, like I could feel there was a militant vibe in there. In the sense, not from the Muslim side. But I said there was.
Talk about Asia, yeah.
there was people there. It was just like it felt a bit uncomfortable, and it was anyway. Some interesting things were said, and the debate just went along. And then, obviously, there's some big zinger points that were made by the atheist side, and I just remember the crowd just erupting in laughter. So Perkins made this argument that and I'll try and represent him correctly, but anyway, someone made a vine out of it because it was like this 6, 7 second, 10 second bit where it's just hilarious. He made his argument that there was a philosophical tradition in Islam, and Islamic scholars look down upon philosophy. Philosophy is about thinking, and that Muslims.
It's like the Oriental.
So thinking is like haram. He actually said philosophy is haram.
He's giving us the ruling in Islam.
And he mentioned the word haram, and it's like there was this awkward silence in the crowd for like, I know you trust me, bro. I was thinking the same thing. I'll find the clip for you, and maybe
Please do.
And I'll share it with you guys.
Share it on our social medias as well.
So and then the crowd just went silent for like a minute. Oh no, sorry, a minute, for like 4 or 5 seconds, just digesting what he'd actually just said. And then one guy just went. Everyone laughed. Everyone laughed, bro. I remember that moment, and I was like, oh, and it was this was being recorded as well. So I think it was being live streamed because it was a really packed. I think they had an extra lecture theater as well that was probably about half full as well. But he said some stupid things, and anyway, and I just remember the laughter that occurred, and then I took a selfie with him as well. I always do that. I took a selfie with him. So I went to Perkins and I took a selfie with him, and I memed it. I've got to find it. I'll find it. I'll check it on my Facebook page. But there were some interesting moments. That was 2013. That was a long time ago. That was I think Al Kawthar brought him in. Hamza. He was doing a tour. But the Dawah has grown and has matured so much. Like there's so much resources now, but there's still so much work to be done. Do you
remember the snippet? Because I remember that debate. Like Faraz had this snippet, like 2-minute snippet, where he was like, it was like a takedown of like something about. I think the opposition made a comment about why are Muslims like in this situation? It's because of Islam, like the Ummah or whatever, like in the Middle East. And then he kind of like gave a takedown. It's like the Westerners come into our country. Do you remember this snippet? It was from that debate. Yeah. I remember seeing it on YouTube. I think someone deleted it, but like
no, it's still on there. I bumped into it. I actually bumped into it.
Were you doing a research for your debate this week?
I'll watch that too. That's another one.
I can't find it on YouTube now. I was trying to pull it up.
I'll find it because I bumped into it. Like
I wanted to play it now for the audience, but it's alright. Yeah, go on.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we'll just insert here.
We'll insert.
Yeah. But yeah. So and then they sent me the guy that we're debating with Faraz, where Ian Bryce, I think his name is, and Mr. Cox, Thomas Cox.
Yeah. Oh, I have an interesting story to share about him, but yeah, go on.
Yeah, so we're debating him. And so I debated Thomas Cox a few years ago, or 2 years ago maybe, at Western Sydney Uni.
I remember. Yeah.
And then, but Ian Bryce debated Hamza at SUMSA. This is like 7 years ago. And anyway, they sent me the video and said, "Let's watch the debate and tell me what you think." Yeah. And so I watched the debate, and man, that was so full crowd, SUMSA crowd, mashallah. And the type of atheist that was basically like, okay, God doesn't exist, but look at this. This is why, and this is why, and this is why, and this is why. So problem of evil. Muslims do this. Why
is he a sophisticated type? Like
no,
is he like
no?
What Abdullah just
described.
Yeah.
No. I think Thomas Cox is probably a little bit better. Okay. I think he had a little bit more like intellectualism to him, as opposed to just. I think there was a lot of whataboutism with Ian Bryce, but I'm looking forward to it. I've never done a 2v2 debate before,
It's like tag team, like WWE, you know, just like if you stumble across Faraz, like take over.
I don't know. I hope so. No. Faraz is like he's the debating champ from high school. And
yeah, he's a machine, mashallah.
So I was to him, you know what?
A lot of plugs to little people this episode.
Yeah, hashtag this guy, hashtag that guy. So him with Faraz, like I was just like, you go. I'm happy to go by your direction in terms of where you want to take it and what you want to do, just because, you know, I'm there to say my bit, do my rebuttal, and see how it goes. But watching the debate with Hamza, I think it will be one that has a bit of entertainment to it, inshallah.
Yeah,
given
inshallah.
that we know what content is coming, I think the James Ford or Uthman Badr one will be more intellectually stimulating and less entertaining. Just because, you know, Uthman's style is.
I think the entertaining ones are the more memorable ones. Like no one really likes. I think the intellectual ones are more for a specific crowd, and for most people, it's like. There'll
still be a level of intellectualism there, as in like, you know, but as in like the opposition engaging with the arguments won't be. Yeah. So when I had the debate with Thomas Cox, I think one thing I remember, he made an argument from nothing.
Something pops out.
Yeah. He literally made that argument.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Dear.
In a different way.
You do the strategic. Does 0 + 0 = 1, and then
I didn't say.
And then the crowd was stuck beer. Allah.
Do they do that in Sydney?
Isn't that a thing? I was talking to some of my guys are like, oh, do you want to go to debate? I'll be like, okay, like when Faraz makes a point, like we don't get it because like we're too dumb, and like he makes a good point. We'll after he's finished his point, some person is stuck beer, and the whole crowd goes Allahu Akbar, and you're just the hype man in the crowd.
I don't know. I've never done
that's a thing, isn't it?
It's all about the militant vibe, bro.
Yeah, I mean, the case for Islam, the case for the existence of God, like doesn't change, right? It's pretty similar. I mean, Hamza said it, Faraz has said it, I've said it before. You know, it's not different. The reason why more or less, it is in a different way. I don't know why you're laughing, bro. You're gonna get me in trouble. If you're listening, no. So the case for God doesn't change. The only reason it's worth doing some background research is then to incorporate some potential objection handling in advance. Yeah. So if you know the sort of perspective the person's going to come from, well, then just chuck it in before you get to the rebuttal. That's the way I look at it, anyway. It's not like, you know, you're going to be bewildered by any new things or anything like that. But the debating scene has changed in you know, since the whole COVID thing, as well as I think it's
all over Zoom.
It's been quiet. It's been really quiet.
Yeah, that's true.
In Sydney, as a Melbourneite, I used to look up to Sydney MSAs and be like, man, look, they're doing debate, you know, with Christians, with atheists,
that's true.
social events, and it's just like there's nothing there now.
Yeah, COVID, subhanAllah. But everything's through Zoom now.
It's pretty rough. Someone from Sydney saying, "Oh yeah, COVID was pretty bad up here." To someone from
I know,
Melbourne,
bro. We actually, yeah.
Do you have any like debate sort of, because just to touch on the art of debating or just the whole setup of debating, where sometimes you have perhaps like, how diligently would you say you have to prepare before the actual event? And in terms of, do you just, because, okay, so if I was like a smart guy, which I'm not, and if I was like debating, even though I wouldn't be, but I guess what I would approach it is like, yeah, just binge watch all the videos on YouTube, make all like a note of all the recurring points that they make, because they'll probably make the same one depending on the topic you're doing with them in the debate with you. Note that down and sort of have like a list out another point, a rebuttal to that point, or that they may bring up in the debate, and sort of work out scenarios where, okay, they'll say this and you'll say that. Because I feel that, like, from my perspective, it will be like some people can do it, like they can come up with very good responses on the spot, or sort of a curveball that might hit them during the debate. They sort of navigate it, you know, in a sort of spontaneous manner, and they have that skill to be able to. But some people may not have that ability, so they have to like diligently plan and prepare beforehand different scenarios and work that out. Like, how do you say you sort of approach a debate, and what's your
I think it's a little bit more simple than that. I've never understood it in that complicated
just
way.
Rock up.
No. So in this respect, yeah. So know your material very well, right? Know your material very well, inside and out, right?
Yeah.
In terms of like objections and thinking on the spot, I think one thing that you can fall into is missing the forest for the trees analogy. And this is what I mean. Yeah. For example, they'll throw so many arguments, that against, like, for example, if God exists, why does this happen? If God exists, why does that happen? If God exists, why does this happen? Yeah. And so you can go to the approach of responding to every single argument, or actually listening to what they're actually saying. Yeah. And responding to the philosophical basis of what they're saying. Yeah. And cancelling out all of them. So the approach I usually take it is that I would make sure that I know my stuff very, very well. You need a bit of quick thinking on the spot, because, but then also being able to digest and interpret what the opponent is saying as well. Being familiar with that side of the argument is important as well. And so I don't really prepare the rebuttal. I do the rebuttal on the then and there.
Wow, what a beast.
No, I think...
Mashallah, bro.
You should bring Faraz here, bro. I'm not the right... Faraz is definitely the person.
No, that makes sense. You have to maintain a kind of fluidity, because you don't know exactly what's going to be said before. And you don't want to become too rigid. If you become too rigid, then you might end up just like a lot of... I'm sure your interlocutors have, just sort of recycling the same few points, like sort of preemptive. And then it looks embarrassing, doesn't it? When you try to preempt what the other person's going to say, and then you miss it, and you kind of like have to twist their argument to make it fit your pre-planned rebuttal as well. I've seen that happen a lot.
Yeah, so I've never been. Yeah, I'd imagine that could happen. Yeah, I could imagine, but I never pre-plan my rebuttal. The rebuttal is just what I would do. So I would present my as a first speaker, or the one of the keynote speakers. I would present my bit, and I would be prepared for that. And my rebuttal will simply be I would summarize the other person's speech. So I just write dot points, and because you're already familiar with them, I used to use these dot points as reminders. So I would literally have my piece of paper, and I will just rattle it off based on this person. He made this argument, so I'll just write this argument as a dot point, and I would know already how to respond to this argument. Yeah, I don't think I don't have any like detailed formula, or if you want, you can buy my book or pay for my course how to unpack debate for $9.97
on Kindle
or something like that. I don't have one of those, but you have practice. You just get practice. And I never did debating. Actually, I did a little bit of debating in high school, but I would really encourage people, or get into those debating things. Even in university, just practice debating mundane stuff. And you
just go up to a random atheist campus.
No, it doesn't have to be atheist or God or anything like that. You know how they do the debating
favorite
clubs?
color or something. Debate about that.
No, I mean, like why like mumsa kebabs are better than kebabs.
So
just go all the way with it.
It can be as simple as that. You just get the art of knowing how to unpack and articulate a coherent argument, and find the flaws of the other, the other side as well. And that's really it.
I think one thing I have noticed, and I do feel like I have tried to be more impartial, and I can actually refer to comments made by two famous ex-Muslims, Vidu Vids and Hassan Radwan, watched the debate between they watched the debate between Muhammad Hijab
I saw this
and I think it was Abdullah Andalusi, wasn't it? Muhammad Hijab, Abdullah Andalusi, and two of the Alex O'Connor, the cosmic skeptic, and another man. And they watched the debate, and they basically said like the Muslims won the debate fair and square, because Islam's strongest point, or maybe it was actually a Muslim versus Christian debate. That was it. I got it confused. Because that was another debate. It was Trinity. It was the Dave Wood Muhammad Hijab debate. Yeah, Trinity or Tawheed. That debate, and then they basically said the Muslims won fair and square. Now, one thing that led me to sort of consider, and I always had this suspicion, is that Muslims are uniquely well positioned, especially in the West, because I have not seen Christian and atheists in their debates understand and fully grasp the Islamic tradition and Islamic theology and the Islamic philosophical discussion the same way that Muslims, Anglophone Muslims, have grasped Christian discussions and atheist discussions. And I suspect that a lot of that has to do with language and just immersion. Like we're born and like we grow up Muslim, and when we're immersed in the Muslim intellectual tradition, if we go to study that way, it's not too difficult for us. And we're also immersed in the Western tradition as well. Whereas for Westerners and for Christians, by and large, they don't really have a great deal of access to authentic Islamic sort of teachings and the discussions.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting. I've
Unpacking new ideas in Boys in the Cave.
No, that's actually a really interesting way of putting it, because what I, when somebody's like, I have actually a debate with after the one at UNSW with Faraz and there's two other guys. I have one with Samuel Green.
That guy, yeah.
And your mates always ask you, are you prepared? Are you ready? And that sort of stuff. And what do you think about the other guy? And and I've always brought it down to, as Muslims and
we have the
I'm
haq.
not a good. I'm not, in most ways, yes. to put it really simply, and just to put it simply and plainly, we have the material to work with. When I feel that. So let me preface it in this way. So I feel that debates, or debates aren't necessarily. I think they're best utilized to not discredit but unpack the incoherency of certain contentions by popular figures who represent them. And so that I think debates function. At least when I involved in debates, the function of the debate is like that for me, to the audience. So for example, they have a particular apologist. So Samuel Green, for example, he's known as a specialist against Islam. Apparently, he is. He's like,
no one can see my facial expression right now, but
Inshallah, donate to a Patreon and you can see video HD quality of Rafael's expression. We're going.
Yeah, so he's known as a specialist with dealing with Islam. And so my intention and my objective of the debate is that, of course, Islam's understanding of certain things is superior, but I would like to show how this person carrying this idea, one, doesn't know what he's talking about, and two, is really poorly defending his own tradition. He's not being genuine in the debate. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. What I mean by that is that when you go into debates, and this is why one of the principles or one of the things that we share in our training courses is for Dawah is not to get into debates, because because we want to engage with people's hearts.
Didn't we just promote getting to debates?
No.
This is a contradiction, mate.
This is on an academic platform. But when we're trying to connect with people's hearts and minds, we don't want them to be defending something. We want them to be open to experience, open to considering things. And so what I feel, when, for example, when Christians come up and they try and debate the Trinity, against Muslims, of Trinity versus Tawheed is the classic title, they look at it from the point of they would look at it from the point of the Trinity is correct. Now let me find as many arguments as I possibly can to defend that, and so they're defending a point of view. They're not coming here with an open mind and seeking to understand the other point of view. The other point of view by default is wrong from that perspective. And the same sort of, there's a similar dynamic from the other side, but I sort of feel that the Islamic tradition promotes a lot more free thought around these sort of topics, and because it's inherently correct. I don't know, is that dogmatic of me saying that? Probably is, but because it is inherently correct, and it's I sort of feel like, alhamdulillah, as Muslims we've got the content to work with. I would say I'm not a good debater, but I definitely got good content because I'm a Muslim, right? So I'd probably boil it down to that, I'd probably boil it down to that.
I think that the Islamic monotheism is just very robust as an explanation. I genuinely feel that there are very few traditions that can articulate as robust of a and a simple yet kind of immovable explanation of the origins of things. We have so many different ways of trying to get around it. But if you look at just the other competing traditions, you have Christianity, which is Trinitarian. And I don't know, on that actually, before I ask the next question, do you feel like the Trinity in Christianity has anything to do with like the history of Europe as like deifying everything? So like I've always thought about, because when I'm studying like ancient history and even, the Roman history in particular, which I have an interest in, that everyone was a god. Any great man was a god. Caesar, oh wow, great politician, god. a demigod even. And I always wondered whether, because the Christianity spread amongst the Gentiles, the non-Jewish population in Greeks, and throughout the Roman Empire, whether just the deification of Isa alayhi salam has to do with that tradition of just deifying anyone known to be good.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting history. It's really interesting history, and I think from my own study, I can only boil it down upon to this: is that the concept of the Trinity was essentially, what's the word? A compromise between Jewish monotheism versus pagan beliefs. And there's a good book. I forget the name of the book, but it's by James Tador. I think it's titled Paul. He talks about the history of Paul, and so Paul is Paul, the so-called Apostle Paul, is credited with sharing the message of Jesus to the Gentiles. It was in the New Testament. It says that Jesus came for the people of Israel, the children of Israel. He didn't come for the Gentiles. Yeah, and so when Paul went out to share his version of Christianity,
sorry to cut you off, but that affirms the Islamic teaching that Isa alayhi salam was a prophet for the Bani Israel, right?
Yeah, of course, 100%,
yeah,
definitely. Yeah. That's actually one of the arguments you use, that he came for a certain time and place. He didn't actually come for humanity. Yeah, he came, and it's in your New Testament, by the way.
Because he had a great interest, alayhi salam, in the Jewish law, didn't he? Like, if you even read, whether you believe in the authenticity of any of the Bible or not, like a lot of his discussions and a lot of his debates were aimed at the kind of Jewish establishment, like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and criticizing them and critiquing them.
He came to uphold the Jewish law.
Yeah, he actually said that himself.
Yeah, he said that. Yeah.
I've come not to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. I think,
absolutely, 100%. Yeah. That's exactly what he said. Yeah, or that's exactly what he said.
Translated into English.
In the Greek New Testament. But the point is that that he came to uphold the tradition that came before him. Yeah, and anyway, so we're back to the Paul thing. Is that so? Paul came to preach to the Gentiles. Yeah, and the Gentiles were obviously very influenced through paganism. Yeah, so other people, non-Jews, more or less. The Roman Empire at the time was a pagan empire. You really have to appreciate that. That's the socio-political, religious context that it was existing in, and it more or less was pragmatic.
Yeah,
it was very pragmatic.
In fact, like when they would conquer certain peoples, they would incorporate their gods into the to the pantheon. They would say like, they'd conquer a Germanic tribe, and the Germanic people would have their own gods, and the Romans would say, yeah, well, they can be gods too.
And if you take a step back from this, is early Christianity actually, there's this. I love saying this because I think it explains it really well. Is that as a comparison in the Islamic tradition, the closer you get to the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, Prophet Muhammad, the closer you get to the more pure, authentic, ways of his life and his teachings and his practice of the religion, And this is just a general principle. The closer you come to the time of the companions of the Prophet, the more pure, I guess, the religion is, more or less. There's a funny irony. The closer you come to the time of Jesus, the more heretical Christianity becomes in reference to the orthodoxy of today.
Actually, that's a good point.
Yeah. So, and what I'll explain this a little bit further. If you look at the early Christian groups, display this so. They highlight this so well. So I'm talking about early Christian groups like Arians, Ebio Knights, Marcionites, Theodosians. These are all groups that the only way we know about these groups is because church fathers refuted them. And what they used to do was they would obviously be persecuted and all their books would be burnt. And the Roman Empire loves burning things, including people, So the only way we know about that these groups existed is because the church fathers sought to refute them, and we have references of the church fathers, And so when we look at like the Ebio Knights, for example, Ebio Knights were a group in the 1st century, and they believed they upheld the Jewish law. They believed that Jesus was not a divine being, but they upheld the law, So more or less in a way of messengership or prophethood, not as a part of God or God himself. One of the earliest groups, the Ebio Knights. You also had the Arians who had a different belief, And when the concept of the Trinity was starting to evolve and becoming to establish, we always reference the Council of Nicaea. Yeah, the Council of Nicaea wasn't when the Trinity was established; it was the beginning. All the Council of Nicaea did was understand or agree on, is Jesus equal to the Father or not? Yeah, and then there was a couple other councils that then sort of crystallized the understanding of the Trinity. So it sort of began there. But Christianity only became like a serious force when the Roman Empire took it up. Yeah, when the Roman Emperor became Christian. Yeah. Before that, it was a persecuted minority, and it wasn't seen as anything serious or challenging. But my point here is that the earlier Christians believed in totally different things than Christians today believe in, and I think a lot of the Christian history is not very well covered by your average Christian. Your average Christian has no idea. Your average Christian thinks that the Bible popped down like this, like the Quran came down in one go almost, yeah. And the Trinity was in there, and the Trinity is in the book, and that's why we believe in, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, co-equal, co-eternal. They're quite ignorant of their history.
Yeah. Wouldn't you say the same for lay Muslims as well? Like, I think at times, like the way we view the lay Christian, the more maybe sophisticated Christians look at the lay Muslims like that. Like, look, Muslims don't even know this part of their history, or you get what I mean? It's like
I'm not saying so. I think it's fair to say that there's lay people on both sides. Yeah. But what I'm saying, what I want to highlight here is that the Islamic history has a simplicity to it. Yeah, that knowing who God is you can literally open it up in almost any chapter of the Quran. It's pretty clear. Yeah, knowing who Jesus was is something that is still undecided. It's still up for debate. You have the different denominations of Christians. You have different understandings of salvation. You have different understandings of even Trinitarians versus Unitarians. Yeah, we always forget the Unitarians. Yeah. The Unitarians,
poor guys,
5-10% of Christians that are still hanging around there,
sad vibes, by themselves.
The best way to pitch the Trinitarians are the Unitarians already done all the homework for you, bro. So they got the best arguments against Trinitarians. So the best arguments against Trinitarians are Unitarians and Jews. The work's already done. Muslims don't have to do anything. Right? Yeah. It's literally already there. The point that I wanted to highlight was that that there's so much that's still being discovered and understood and still to navigate. Whereas Islam has this very clear simplicity to it, that it's there, it's obvious. These core concepts are not. We never debated this. We never debated who Muhammad is. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. We never debated who Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is.
Yeah,
like these are cornerstones, foundations of our religion, and yeah.
No, the discussions were about far more specific details than the kind of nature of Tawheed. No one was questioning whether Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a deity or whether they were, or whether
I'm
they
sure
were
there may have been like one person,
but it wasn't as if it wasn't like in Christianity, where they were very intense and quite literally heated discussions, and then consequences. Very heated consequences.
So I had a debate with Samuel Green, and Samuel Green's been he's almost every single person has debated him, and finally he came along to debating me, right? so literally everyone has debated him. So much so, I remember the first debate that I ever watched was years ago, like a full debate that I watched, maybe it was like 8 or 9 years ago, and Uthman debated him in Sydney Uni, I think it was, or something like that, and I was really impressed in the way he went about it, but nevertheless.
Who, by Uthman or
Uthman?
Okay, no.
Samuel hasn't really changed his tune for a long time, long time. Anyway, I went. The topic was who is Jesus, and you simply display all this, and I always bring up a lot of the history, because a lot of the history is not known. But it's there. It's on. I'm actually reading a book at the moment, so I was going to bring up. I'll pull the book out. Wait a second.
From your pocket.
I'm not in the hotel, so I don't have it on me. But this is all known by like academics in professors, ministers of what is it? What do they call it? like big shot people in universities. Yeah, people that are respected and they know their stuff. And then, I'm not just referring to Bart Ehrman, right? Because Christians love to, like, evangelicals love to discredit Bart Ehrman. You know, he's not even a believer, right?
Yeah.
He's an atheist now. You don't even need to rely on Bart Ehrman. There's many others that are really honest about the history and are still trying to, bring together that belief and the historical realities.
I think Bart Ehrman is actually, I don't think he's an atheist. I think he's like a sort of deist or agnostic, isn't he? Like he sort of believes, but he's not exactly sure.
Last I saw, I think he was. Yeah, I think he's. Last I heard was atheist. I'm not sure.
Oh, really?
I'd love to get him on.
The question is Aqidah, yeah. So what do you know? And
Have you considered
the Quran?
Have you considered Islam yet?
Yeah. I think he's one of those guys that
just so scarred by Christianity. I can't put up with it anymore.
That equates,
because he was hard, like Christian as well. And then
I'm pretty sure he went through the seminary with William Lane Craig.
He did. He said that. I remember watching a discussion that he had together, a debate, I think it was, and he mentioned that. And interesting how they went two different directions.
Yeah, well, I think Bart Ehrman went more into the historical side of things, and then William Lane Craig obviously went into theology and like apologetics. And so they had when they actually had that discussion, it was quite fascinating to see both sort of angles colliding. And I noticed a lot of the evangelical Christians and uni, they used to, in their debates, refer heavily to history as a proof of Christian as a proof of Christian, the truth of the Protestant or Christian message. And I think that the reason for that obviously is because their as I said, their theology is not particularly robust. It's kind of confusing.
But see, even the history thing, even the historical argument is. It's got so many holes in it.
Exactly.
And people don't realize this because I think it's because we live in sort of a world that was dominated by Christianity, and
it still is.
Yeah, it still is, and oft said, that like the crucifixion was a historical reality. Yeah, okay, all right, okay, cool. I get it. Let's take a step back. Okay, what are your sources? Well, the Bible says so. No, that's the claim. That's not the evidence. The claim is made there. The evidence is not there. Okay, so what's the evidence? And you look into the evidence of even the most basic thing of the crucifixion, historical evidence, because this is presented as a historical fact. This either happened or it didn't happen. Right? It's not something that could have happened. It's like it's history. Did it happen or not? Yeah, it's not a false dichotomy. If you look at the historical evidence, it's totally to the contrary. So what's the historical evidence? Yeah. So firstly, the New Testament is not written by eyewitnesses. It's not written by disciples. It's written by anonymous authors that were decades, even up to, if you're looking at the Gospel of John, you're looking at maybe about 70, 80 years after Jesus's supposed event. Yeah. So if the claim is being made in a source that was disconnected to the event, all right, what other evidence do we have outside of this source, outside of the New Testament? We don't have. I think the earliest mention of it comes like 50, 60, 70 years later, right? That's really poor evidence. We had historians didn't just come into existence in the 5th century or the 6th century or the 10th century. Historians existed at the time of Jesus.
Well, I was about to say, this is such a big pivotal moment in shaping like Western civilization and in describing Christianity. Like, we know that Caesar crossed the Rubicon because Caesar wrote it down. His opponents wrote it down. Everyone who could write, who was around him, wrote it down, and we still have those books. Like they've been passed down as from the contemporary, and to the present, and like. When you talk about Christianity, there's barely any contemporary sources whatsoever that describe the life and times of Christ.
Well, wasn't there even after the crucifixion, wasn't there like hundreds of people that rose from the grave and walked down?
So in one of the Gospels, it mentions that there was like a resurrection. One of the 4 Gospels. So 3 other gospels missed this crazy event of people coming out of their graves, which I don't think if you saw someone come out of their grave, chances are you're probably not going to forget it.
Yeah.
So there's other details too. But I wanted to mention on your point, it was that the historical basis of it's quite so shoddy that all it took was a man called Paul. Yeah, a man called Paul who came 20 or so years after the event. Never saw him. In fact, persecuted Christians before that, and he was able to engineer more or less a new version of Christianity then and there, one that did away with the commandments, the one that did away with the practice of the disciples, and now he is the authority. Christianity, as you know, is Pauline. It's not Jewish. If you open up, from Jesus. If you open up when you're looking at the New Testament, if you compare the writings of Paul and the instructions of Paul versus the practices of Jesus and the disciples, there's this very, very stark comparison to be made there. And then of course the question of whether Paul was an actual apostle or not, and whether he's even an authoritative source to begin with.
About the authenticity of his letters.
Yeah, so I think it's a good quarter of his letters. We don't know whether he wrote them or not, right? And there's been additions, and some of his letters are sort of like mishmashed from other people. Anyway, I think that's a symptom of the New Testament in itself. But there's big questions to be asked there, and these are questions that generally Christians shy away from. And if it wasn't for Christian-Muslim dialogue, because new atheists, if you look at like the likes of Dawkins and Harris and blah blah blah, when they debate with Christians, they're still debating on God being merciful and powerful, and like really they're still hung up on the problem of evil, right? Essentially. When it comes to Muslims have got the fortitude to really discuss and debate and unpack these more finer details, and I think it gets a lot of people thinking, and I really appreciate that.
We on historicity of like resurrection, we were talking about like there's no other like historical sort of accounts to back the claim of the resurrection being fact. However, wouldn't you say sometimes if we use as Muslims trying to debate Christians, we use that sort of line of thinking, sometimes it may go against us because, like, for example, the more popular point that's raised is like, who actually saw Rasulullah split the moon, and where's the historical evidence for that?
That's not like an intrinsic part of the Islamic theology, is it?
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was going to mention.
Yeah.
But in the point of historicity, isn't that on the same plane in the very least?
No. So let me explain why. Yeah.
Wow,
so,
I won't get refuted.
No. So I'll just put it into context, as Rafael mentioned. I'll put into context that so the Islamic belief is built upon that God exists and that the Prophet Muhammad is a true prophet and messenger of God. Yeah. And so if God exists and he's a true and prophet messenger of God, whatever happens, the possibility of miracles is totally possible. Yeah. It's not dependent on anything else. The Christian creed depends on this, that Jesus is God, and Jesus is the Son of God, and he sacrificed himself on the cross, and he was resurrected after a certain period of time, and whatnot. He's going to come back, and so that's actually a foundational cornerstone of their belief. This is so from an epistemological level. That's actually one of their pillars of their epistemology. So as soon as you take that out, I think there's a lot of other questions to be asked. But Islamically, from our Islamic point of view, our Islamic belief rests on that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of man, life, and the universe, and that he sent different prophets and messengers, and the last one being Prophet Muhammad. And if those two are true, everything that happens out within that, from truth comes truth. So that deductive basis, I think, takes care of that. And so I wouldn't nod my head if that accusation was being made on Muslims. I'd probably shift it back to them.
And also, if you want to, for comparison, discuss the even revisionist Orientalist historians coming like Patricia Crone, who's one that I actually studied in a bit more depth at uni. She actually did not have any questions to raise over the historicity of the Quran in terms of it being the best and closest document to, you know, the time and life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In fact, this whole book was about deconstructing hadith, which I think she did very poorly. And I've talked about it on other podcasts as well, like some of the arguments that she made. But even though that the entire sort of book deconstructed what Muslims know about the, you know, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and about the tradition, but at the same time, the Quran was never questioned as a historical document. And it's very difficult to, because we actually have manuscripts that are dated, 10 years, 15 years? The Sana manuscript, I think, is...
in the Birmingham manuscript, which is ironic.
Yeah, it was
like,
even
so
during the time.
Yeah, so
everyone knows that Birmingham's a Muslim city these days, you know.
So it's funny when you watch debates on Speaker's Corner and Christian missionaries debate this concept of the thing, and they're like, "Hey guys, you just literally just go across the road and you can go see for yourself." Yeah, and that's dated to during the time of Uthman.
Yeah.
Right. So which is essentially
in line with what we
exactly. Yeah. So that
so if you want to compare again the strength of both primary texts, like you can't.
It's not even apples and oranges, bro. It's like it's. I wish I had a better comparison, but it's like totally different. Yeah. it's like it's on a different level. But hey, tell me about your. You mentioned that your Italian background. Did you have a Roman Catholic sort of?
I went to a Catholic school because my parents wanted me to go to a Catholic school. But my family have sort of moved away from Catholicism. Actually, generations before had actually drifted away from Catholicism and toward socialism and communism. So like they came from a more militant activist background. During fascist Italy, like my grandfather was imprisoned. My great grandfather was imprisoned for like anti-fascist activities. So they weren't particularly religious. My grandmother is still a devout Catholic, but no, I don't think I was really raised. I remember going to Catholic scripture and questioning the actual scripture teacher, like, how do you know this stuff? When was it written down? And I don't know if someone
cheeky boy,
someone put that in my head, or whether I was just wanted to annoy the scripture teacher. But I do remember having that kind of question in my mind. I was actually, when I was young, I actually believed in God. So I was, I remember sort of the fitra in that sense. Like naturally I would pray to something, and I used to ask God, and I never questioned the existence of God.
What did you believe about Jesus?
I didn't believe Jesus was God. That's the thing.
Okay.
So I didn't actually have any conception of the Trinity being true whatsoever. I never for once in my childhood believed the Trinity to be true. I don't know why. I mean, I did go and I managed to take on board the idea of God, which a lot of members of my family don't even accept, like they're atheist or agnostic. But I genuinely believe in a God that could intervene. Otherwise, I wouldn't have supplicated. And then later on, obviously, I was, it was the zeitgeist was of new atheism. So I was swept up in that. And later on, after that, again, you just start to question. It's almost like, I think you guys mentioned before, and it was a really interesting point. I wanted to sort of interrupt at that point, during that specific discussion, because you both mentioned how the Christians move away from Christianity and there's no alternative. The sort of Christianity doesn't float their boat, and then it's like, well, there's no religion. It's fine, like whatever. I actually went through that kind of phase, and then I'm like, hang on, there's Islam. Maybe I should look into that. And so when Islam is there, I think, and it's not so distant, because where I grew up as well, there's a lot of Muslims, so it's sort of culturally familiar. And then because I was aware of Islam, and I was aware of the fact that it was a very strong tradition, I kind of looked into that. And I think that's the role of Dawah summed up right there. Like, we have to provide, especially an alternative for people in the West who are trying to seek answers and seek truth and may not be satisfied with either Christianity or the atheist and secular trends. I think
there are. That's a good point. I think there are a lot of disenfranchised people that inherently they can feel this, they know this, and perhaps this is all they hold on to, and presenting and sharing the message of Islam is definitely. I think that highlights one of the responsibilities, or a component of it at least. But it has so much. It's people who are searching for the truth, people who are disenfranchised with what they have,
And also Muslims
yeah.
who want answers to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
kind
exactly.
of polemics that they've had to grow up around, because it is intense, you know, especially once you get to uni and you're kind of bombarded from all angles by very hostile ideas.
So what I would generally advise people is that, like, when we do our training courses and get people involved in you know, even in the basics of Dawah, I find that
Learn the go rap. That's it.
funniest guy. Yes, true. And I actually do.
Yeah, of
please
course.
do. So what it does is that it empowers yourself, right? Empowers yourself. It equips you with the tools and the knowledge to navigate these sort of questions and the intellectual basis of your own belief, right? And then, of course, you're able then to you know, discuss and debate with other people as well. But the first point is it empowers you, and I think for me, that's what it did for me. When I got involved in this area, it was really like, wow, okay, you know, I was a Muslim and I knew I'm Muslim, but this is really, wow, I didn't know this much, yeah. And now that I know this, I was a little bit sort of infectious in many ways, that I just wanted to share it and wanted to talk about it all the time. And then, you know, one thing led to another, and here I am. So that was a short story long story short. I think that's what I meant to say. But yeah, that's what I generally do. It was like, hey, you know, everyone's different. Some people are more introverted than others, and some people are more extroverted, and some people want to, you know, keep to themselves. Some people want to. That's fine. That's fine. Come along, and there'll be something for you. Yeah,
I always found though, like as Muslims, if we were dialoguing with whoever, like non-Muslims or Christians, or atheists, and all that, one of the biggest hurdles is basically I think to a certain degree, most people have that sort of Orientalist perspective of Islam, in the sense that, oh, we're going to come and chop your hand off, or, you know, it's very militant and violent, and I don't know, all Muslims hate the West, and that is true to some degree, but you get what I mean? Like, it's just that hatred and no like compassion and love. And I guess, like, as Muslims, if you were to like do Dawah, for example, you're sort of fighting hard to combat that sort of idea or those preconceived notions of Islam that they already have in their mind. And do you find that to be the case? Because I just found that in my experience, like, that's kind of where at times you're left to sort of just say, no, Islam isn't like that, you know, Islam is this, or you get what I mean? So it's like,
I think it's a generalization.
Yeah, I was gonna just say, from my own personal experience, like, my family, the entirety of my family is not Muslim, and they're not like that. Especially, like, okay, there's a couple, but by and large, especially when you look at like Western leftists, and say what you want about the whole political scene here, I certainly don't agree with, you know, like the kind of liberal perspectives on religion and modern perspectives on religion. But what I would say is that the idea that, you know, all of these average Joes, literal average Joe, Bob, Jack, like, that they hate Islam and they're hostile, is just fundamentally not true. Because, yeah, in my experience with my family, they've always defended Islam and Muslims when there has been someone in, you know, amongst the you know, family gathering or the barbecue who said something about Muslims. 9 out of 10 people come and be like, hey, that's ridiculous, you know, like, you don't know anything about what you're talking about. This is a really complex, and like, Muslims have achieved this and this. So no, I wouldn't say, Tanzim, that it's fair to characterize you know, the average non-Muslim or by and large, to say by and large.
I'll add something to that, right? Because I think I actually agree with you a lot on that, and that generally,
dang, 2-on-1, I'm left alone.
Generally, the experience is that there's a subset of people there, but there's a lot of people who don't absorb this stuff. They might be affected by it, but your engagement with them can change things quite drastically. But what opened up my eyes a lot, especially we did, you know, when this lockdown stuff started, coronavirus stuff started heating up in the UK and here in Australia. What iERA did, another plug, yeah, I can do this plug. What iERA did was they launched this thing called a Viral Awakening, which was this online chat service. Yeah, so basically using, I'm probably sharing the intellectual property with you here, but it's no surprise they were using targeted, and they still do. And I'm still, I know I'll give another pitch after this, but they were using targeted Facebook ads right, around the world. So at different locations, different demographics of people, and if you know how to use those Facebook ads, you can really really penetrate really specifically. And through that, they basically had a chat service that people were inquiring about Islam. So what it was there'd be like a particular ad that would be and which was essentially a meme. Right, so it was a picture with some text on it, get someone to think about something, and all they had to do is they had to press a button, and would start a chat. And so there was the viral awakening. It started with just one chat service. We've had chat operators from across the world, so every single time zone. And I had a team here in Australia, and I was taking care of the Australian time zone. And what I noticed from that was that there's countries out there that aren't that don't have the same level of Islamophobia than Aussies do. When you engaged with Aussies on the chat service, you had a lot of, you had that little bit of hatred, but you had other parts of the world, like the other parts of the world. Let's just call it that for now. And people were so receptive to Islam, so much so that within the first couple of months, and the official stats were that, and we have outreach specialists in every single one of these locations. So where somebody embraces Islam, there's a process to follow that up. Yeah, so it's not just shahada, put it on the tally and ticking off the
that's the goal.
Ticking off the KPIs. Give my shahada
5 shahadas per day.
No. So there's an entire process of new Muslim education in every single one of these places. Yeah, and
where were the places where you sort of noticed the most?
Because my time zone lined up with Southeast Asia. I think that's more Philippines, Solomon Islands, Fiji, those countries are in that vicinity. Yeah. And we had 500 shahadas within the first 2 months. 500, right? And the chat service wasn't even optimized. They were still playing around with it, right? So it was just like ads were probably this and that. And I noticed that Spana with Philippines and Solomon Islands Papua New Guinea, Philippines and Papua New Guinea. These people were very specifically receptive to Islam in a way that I had never seen before. Well, it was just like, it was amazing. Like, whenever I went on the chat service and I had someone from the PNG, I was like, yes, it's going to go good. And it did.
No, it's incredible. I think I remember reading, actually, for people who are aware of who Edward Blinden was, he was actually this was at the turn of the 19th century. So this is late 1800s. He was a Christian missionary, former slave from the Caribbean who returned to Liberia. They created a country in Africa for repatriated slaves. And he actually returned there, and above Liberia is Guinea, which was a very strong Muslim area. It was actually had an imamate, there was an Islamic state for a very long time. Yeah. So he actually went in there to give dawah. Anyway, he came back down a few years later, and he basically concluded, and I think he was an ordained priest or something like that. He concluded essentially that for the African people, Islam is better than Christianity. Okay, yeah. And he kind of got excommunicated from the church, and everyone was like, yeah, it was pretty funny because, he went there to convert everyone. He came back saying like, okay, you know what? Because, and his point was that Islam actually spread to the African people through other Africans, like North Africa, and they had their own kind of tradition. Whereas, Christianity spread through European invasion.
Yes.
And so I think with a lot of these countries, like Papua New Guinea and perhaps other areas that were affected by like colonial violence, Islam actually provides an alternative where they can, have a sense of spirituality, a grounded belief, and they don't have to turn to sort of the religion of the people who vanquished them.
So I had this one story where I was on the chat service one day, and this is still going ahead, right? So it's still happening as we speak now. In fact, I'm recruiting volunteers, so that's a second pitch, but I'll get to that later. But I had this one where I was speaking to this guy from Papua New Guinea, and we have a particular process of doing the dawah, so we make sure that everything's understood properly, and it's not just hey, say this and see you later kind of thing. Yeah. We're not tricking people into that. We're getting into understand what they know or what they are signing up for. And so anyway, I went through the whole process, the go route process with this person, and and
they converted.
So I think he had a bit of trouble. I could have sensed that he had trouble saying the shahada. right? Because it's difficult. And if you're transliterating it in English for you, the guy probably can't read English too well, like that in that way. And so I said to him, send me a phone number and I'll give you a call. Let's do it over the phone. So I called him up and he said it and he was so happy. The first thing I do is I connect him with our outreach specialist, who's a native Papua New Guinean there, Muhammad Papua, his name is. And I'll connect him with him and say, let's set up a time so you meet up, catch up with the guys and get him involved in the, your new Muslim process. And then, so I'm WhatsApping him, and so we stayed in chat WhatsApp, and then so I had this chat with him before Jummah, it was on a Friday, and then by Maghrib time, he calls me up, and he says to me, "Hey, I have another four family members who've become Muslim too, because this is a tribal society." So I'm not sure where his position was, but anyway, so one guy becomes Muslim in the early afternoon. That turns into another 4 people by Maghrib, and is like, I want to build a mosque. I want to build a mosque.
Whoa.
There was a moment to me I felt like saying to him, just chill, relax. But I think I just more needed to say that to myself. But there's people like that, and the work is obviously continuing there to the point where we need more people. That's just a matter. It's just a matter of fact. And this chat service has actually extended itself. Now it's in different languages. So it's in French, German, Swahili, Spanish,
Italian,
English. I'm not sure if it's in Italian. Probably not yet. I don't think we have a team in it. We have a guy in Italy. I don't think we have a team in Italy yet.
Rafael, you
want a job?
You want a job?
And so anyway, so this sort of things where you realize that when you interact with, it's sort of like doing travel without traveling. So when you're interacting with different people from different parts of the world, you realize how different their levels of thinking or the kinds of thinking is, and how they're not influenced by other things. So in Australia, you expect this Islamophobia, Muslims, this, and then when we had chats from America, you'd get some big, Bible bashing kind of American patriots as well. But then when you had chats with other parts of the world, it'd be like, this was just so natural and easy to do. There was no barrier at all. It's like, yeah, this makes sense. I actually believe this. I didn't know, but I actually believe this. But there's another layer of complexity here, or maybe a barrier of sorts. Like we do a lot of engagement. I know when I was back in the days when there was the MSA, and I know this from the experience of our outreach specialists in Fiji and PNG. One of the tactics that some of these Christian groups do, and this is an age-old technique that they used to do in Europe, age-old technique, is to discredit Islam before anyone even considers it. Yeah, so they spread lies about Islam and Muslims to their community. So, for example, in Papua New Guinea and Fiji, this happens a lot. Yeah, so when it comes to Dawah, you've sort of polluted the mind already before they can consider things, and so much so that they have classes on this. Like, for example, when James White came to Melbourne, and James White is probably one of the more neutral-ish. Like, he's a more reasonable kind of guy, neutral, if you want to call it that, yeah. And they had a session on this, on essentially how to interact with Muslims and how to engage with Muslims. And there's a guy in Melbourne by the name of Bernie Powers. Yeah, I think Bernie Powers, huh? Yes, but he actually has a Dawah stall in the city on Burke Street, and his Dawah stall is not to teach Christianity; it's simply against Islam. Yeah, it's against Islam. And through pushing people away from Islam, and he tries to, and from what I've noticed, he preys on people who are like, who are Muslim and they have social problems, for example. Yeah. And anyway, he's got all these pamphlets that show how Islam is incorrect. He actually has pamphlets.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Isn't it a bit sad? Like, imagine as a Muslim, you're just doing that. Like, you have this hatred for Christianity stall or something, and
I'm pretty sure you'd be in jail by now.
Yeah,
you'd be cancelled straight away, right? But the point is that they use this tactic to discredit Islam. So to rather than pushing something positive, they push something negative just to ensure that their congregation, for example, isn't affected by Islamic thought. Yeah.
Yeah, they have to. They
yeah.
kind of have to do that. And it's really interesting. We've had another discussion as well, and it's something I've observed that by and large, the mass scale conversions are seldom European, like sort of middle class European white people, so to speak. Mostly, if you look at conversions in recent years in the West, even you're looking at like at the moment
conversion to Christianity.
Conversion to Islam. Yeah. So when I'm talking about taking shahadas, like mass shahadas, it's very rarely big hit. Like there's sort of the snowballing of shahadas in like European and Western like white communities. Yeah. It's mostly like obviously we had the African American community, which accounts for a quarter of the Muslim population of the United States. In recent years, the Latino community has been massive. They actually had a Vice documentary about that as well. And then if you look at in the United Kingdom, there was actually a Christian sort of forum held by a church in London, because 1 in 10 African and Jamaican youths, like black youths in London, were converting to Islam from Christianity. So they had to kind of come together and like have a forum, and be like, "Yeah, guys, what's going on here? What are we doing wrong?" You know? Yeah. So it's
actually on that point, if I can add, there was a sort of a parallel to us when we were ramping up Dawah efforts when I was at uni on campus. Suddenly, you see all this Christian stuff popping up too. Mm-hmm. It was like, there's this space that we need to compete for, this market that we need to compete for, more or less. But yeah.
What do you think of, just to get your thoughts on Unidawa and the way it's conducted? Because I never found it being that successful. And I've heard stories, like I remember Sheikh Kamal al-Makki in America. I think he's associated with Al-Maghrib Institute, or was. I'm not sure if he is anymore. He was overseeing a Dawah sort of effort at a university, and they were like us, like they had a couple of shahadas, every couple of years, there'd be maybe 1 or 2. But then when he oversaw it, they had like 30 or 40 shahadas within the first semester, and they were like good shahadas, not just, say this.
Okay.
And it made me wonder, like, what is it with the typical approaches that we use that is perhaps rendering our efforts less effective, or our outreach isn't sufficient, or is it maybe that we are in a more hostile environment? Like I really don't know. Like, what are your thoughts?
I think from my experience, it's been that when we used to do Dawah, it's just something that like there's no when in the early days of uni, and we would just go out there as sort of like enthusiastic people, and to be honest, didn't know really what I was going to say. Just going to come and respond to what they say to me, and try and navigate the conversation. I don't really have a strategy. I don't really have any training. I don't have much experience. I probably don't even have great resources. There's not much leadership. We're just passion and inspired people to come together and do it. Where that sort of did change is twofold. One, obviously the training education. We infused a lot of that as we introduced a lot of that skilled people up very, very quickly. And it gave people gave people confidence and a thirst to keep moving. The second thing is the mentality, the philosophy behind it. Yeah. And so the philosophy of why we give Dawah is essentially this. Obviously, actually twofold. Firstly, as a worship, as a means of worship, a means of pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is something that is an obligation. The second is that our responsibility is there to convey the message. It's not to convert people. Our responsibility, our task there is not to convert people. Now that sounds as a Muslim, like, what are you talking about? You don't want people to become a Muslim? No. What I mean is our responsibility is to convey. The guidance comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So long as we're conveying in the best manner possible, with wisdom, good instruction, good preaching, as the ayat highlights, that's our responsibility. Guidance comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Naturally, by conveying the message in the correct way, in the best way possible, people coming to Islam is a byproduct. That's not our target. It's not like I go out there on Dawah and say, man, I can't get out of, I need to have this stall. I can't leave this stall unless I have 5 shahadas, man. No. My perspective is that the responsibility I'm fulfilling is sharing the message. So just share the message. That's what you have to do. There's no pressure. There's no KPIs or anything like that from that perspective. I keep using that corporate lingo. I shouldn't.
No, it's good. I think it's really good because people do get into that mentality, don't they? Where they think there is like a KPI, like like Tanzim got 5 shahadas last week. I've only got 1.
So we don't judge our success based on that. And you have the beautiful story of Nuh alayhi salam. Yeah, like come on, we can't gloss over that story. 900 years. He's got a handful of followers. Most of his family, it's not even his family. And 900 years. Yeah, and he's not there at the lowest level of Jannah. By the way, hey man, hey, we'll just get you in there because you tried. No. The moral of that story, or one of the big lessons from that story, is that he fulfilled his responsibility. His responsibilities, he had his patience, perseverance. His struggle was his conveying of the message. His success is not judged based on how many people came to Islam. Yeah, so from our perspective, if we reframe our mentality on this, the task is so easy. There's no pressure. You go there and of course once you've sort of trained up and you've learned all the ropes, I guess, or at least some of them, convey the message, and you'll get better at it with practice. Yeah, people accept it or not. That's part of the struggle. And people will. I felt that at the universities, especially, it was a really good training ground because people are polite. Yeah, people are nice. It's a really easy way to engage with people. If you want to get practice, do Dawah at uni before you go out. And so I thought it was a really, really good practice training ground. The other thing was that you could hold activities, and people are young. They're not married. They're not committed to anything. They've got a lot of time. They've got enthusiasm. And they're part of the MSA, and it's just it's part of the development of a youth and that sort of stuff. So I'm a big fan and a big believer of Dawah on campus. The other thing also is with the Dawah on campus is that you have stalls, I guess, but then we also have this thing called the Jesus exhibition. Yeah, and we basically use that to engage with Christian unions, because Christian unions are huge, right? Just like we're building Muslim youth for the Muslim community, Christians funding times 100.
That's what I was saying. They have a lot more money than
a lot more money. So they got a lot more, and they are moving up in their evangelical work. Yeah. Whether they don't have great material, but the point is they're moving up on the evangelical work. So much so that at Monash Uni, so I remember I did my training workshop on Christianity and then Trinity, and then we'd have the exhibition. So we'd build a group of volunteers to then facilitate the exhibition. And then one of the volunteers were like, I came to your training workshop, and I didn't want to do the exhibition thing, but I was just sitting at in the food court, and someone came up to me and started talking to me about Christianity. And I was like, man, this is stealth missionary Dawah, man. And he came and started talking about Christianity. But I was like, it's a good thing that I went to a workshop. I used some of those lines about the Trinity. And I was just like, wow, imagine that. Imagine that sort of Muslims doing Dawah like that. Just, sliding. It's like, sliding in the DMs like that in real life.
We might have to wrap up in a minute or two, but did you have any sort of final thoughts, I guess, in regards to Dawah or anything in terms of, I don't know. Yeah, any final thoughts you want to share?
No, just excited with working with the MSAs. I'm going to UNSW, Sydney Uni. We went to Macquarie before. We're going to MIA here in Melbourne, in Sydney, Masjid Al-Nur as well. I'm here in Sydney until the 29th. So just excited to make the most of this trip, meet as many people as possible, and connect with many people as possible as well. So that's really what I'm here for, to really supercharge our efforts on the ground, to build some teams, share the message, and go back to Melbourne and continue doing the same thing.
No, it's a pleasure to have you. It's been very enjoyable to meet you and sharing.
I'm glad we made it upstairs.
Man,
we got in the studio.
We should have a full-time BITC video vlog thing going. That was like crazy experience, but we made it happen.
I don't think I need to go to gym today. I know that.
I hope nobody got hurt in the process.
Thank you. I mean, it's been an incredible like chat, and honestly, like you have so much insight into the field of Dawah in particular, and I really enjoyed the stories and what we've shared and discussed today. So thank you so much for coming out and giving us your time. We really, really appreciate it, and inshallah other people do as much as I did.
Abdul, my pleasure. And hope to see you guys for episode 3.
That's right.
Alright.